Welcome to Sew with Mrs. Herbert. In episode 19, we're going to be working with the facing. Now, there are 4 different aspects. So the first, preparing the facing. So it will look like this in step 5. Applying the facing to the skirt. That is step 6. Understitch, which is step 7. And then handwork, which shows here on picture illustration number 8, tacking this down. So to begin, we'll start with preparing the facing. Now our directions say number 5, apply interfacing to front facing and back facing sections. Stitch right side seam of facing sections. Edge finish unnotched edge. Well, let's break that down. We have cut out our 2 interface pieces. We have piece 7 and 8, and we have the fabric and the interfacing. Now the interfacing is iron-on interfacing, and as you remember then, there's some bumpy side. That bumpy side has little dots that will melt with the iron and adhere it to the fabric. We don't want that bumpy side to extend, even though we cut it out accurately. So just to be safe that we don't get any sticky stuff on our iron or ironing board, we're going to trim this a little bit. So here's my fold. Yes, I'm trimming off my notch, and we're trimming about 1/4 of an inch off. It can be a little less, we don't have to measure. So I'm going around long side, short side, and then the other long side. And as you can see, I still have it folded in half. So there's the interfacing for piece 7. I'll keep those together. And now for piece 8. Another reason that we trim this is to reduce bulk. That means having an extra layer on the edge that we are doing a seam finish. All right, I'm going to take these sets to the iron and show you how we press them on. I'm ready to press these. I have my iron set on blend. It's cotton polyester blend. This fabric is 100% cotton. It could handle a much higher temperature, but this interfacing, a more medium temperature is appropriate. So I'm putting the wrong side up, and I'll feel this. So the bumpy side I need to put down, and I center this. Scoot it over a little bit. See this edge too close? So we'll move it over. Smooth it out. Okay, so we haven't stretched anything, but it's nice and smooth and flat. So now I'm going to press. I'm not ironing, I'm pressing. I just counted to 5 in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we'll slide this down. All right. Now you check it. If it seems like it has not adhered enough, then go ahead and try some more. Just a few more seconds perhaps, but this looks perfect. So let's do the other one. Open this up, right side down, wrong side up. The bumpy side goes down. 2, 3, 4, 5. That looks perfect. Now that we have our inner facing attached to our facing, let's read step 5 again. Apply inner facing to front facing and back facing sections. We did that. Stitch right side seam of facing sections and then edge stitch. So I want to show you how I figured out which side would be the right side. It's easy to get mixed up. We need it to be open where the zipper is and closed where the side seam is. So first of all, I pinned my pattern piece back on, and I want you to see, say like, well, how do I know the difference? Let me just show you something. The notches on these, if I put them back to back, I line up the center, the fold. Can you see that the notches are actually look like a double notch if you put them next to each other? So this is the front facing. The notches are a little further apart on the front facing, closer together on the back facing. Okay, the next step I did was I'm thinking, okay, when I put right sides together, here's the front of the facing, here's the front of the skirt. So when I put right sides together, there's my notches, they'll match up. Here's the opening. So since this is the side that has the side seam, this is the side I pinned together. All right, I went through all that thinking process and then I pinned them. Now I know I can remove these pattern pieces and I can stitch a 5/8 inch seam allowance. We remove this one. And I can see the little line where the 5/8 inch is. If you want to put tape there, you're welcome. I am going to reverse. Reverse again. Put my threads. It doesn't say anything about trimming this seam, but I do to reduce the bulk. So I've got my 5/8 inch seam. I just trimmed it to about 1/4 inch. And then you can see on the picture here, they didn't trim it, but then they did press it open. Okay, and I'm just going to finger press it here. So to do my edge stitch, well, it says, actually it doesn't say, it just says finish it. And they show you they've turned it up 1/4 inch. So as I've taught you before, I'm going to sew 1/4 inch so then I can iron it on that line and I won't have to, if I didn't sew a line, I would have to use my seam gauge, mark it at 1/4 inch, and I'd be over at the iron turning it up and pressing. That's very tedious. That totally takes the fun out of sewing. So instead, if I mark a line with a line of stitching, it's much quicker. I don't need to backstitch. So as I sew, I'm watching the little line. There's a 1/8, there's a line with no measurements, and then a 3/8. So obviously 2/8 or 1/4 of an inch is the one right in the middle. So now I'll meet you at the iron. Let's press the edge of our facing up right along that stitching line. Press my seam open. And because that interfacing is in there, it doesn't really want to lie flat, but keep pushing at it. All right, I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and I'll stitch right close to this fold. If you would feel more comfortable, you can go ahead and pin this 1/4 inch down. If you did, you would pin from the fold toward the other side, so at a right angle. Feel free to do that. I don't feel like I need to, so I'm just going to start. When I say stitch close to the fold, you're stitching actually a little less than 1/8 of an inch. So just watch your needle. You'll see that it's halfway or closer to the fold. And there we go. Now let's look at our directions. Our facing looks like step 5 now. And it said edge finish, so we have finished step 5. Let's take a look at step 6. We want it to look like this picture. We're wrapping our facing around the top of our skirt with the open side where the zipper is. Let's read number 6. With right sides together, pin facing to garment, matching centers and right side seams. It says facing extends 5/8 of an inch beyond the left front opening edge and 1/2 an inch beyond the left back opening edge. Stitch. And then it says layer seam. I'll talk to you about that later. So we're pinning it, we're matching up our side seam, we're matching the notches, and then we've got the front end extending and the back extending. And they've explained one is extending 5/8 and the other 1/2 inch. Now, why is that different? Remember that we turned one side back, and in this case, we turned it back 6/8. So it's going to extend 6/8 on the front, and on the back, it will extend the 1/2 inch. Okay, so let's start with pinning, matching up our notches in our side seam, and then after that's all pinned, we'll talk about the next step. Make sure the side seam is open. So the seam from the facing matches the side seam of the skirt. It should fit. Notice how that just fits so flat. Okay, so I pin that between my notch and that side seam. And I'll pin in between. All right. So it's extending like we said. But the facing is pinned really smoothly right along that edge of the waist. There's no puckers or bumps or anything. Now we'll go to these notches. And can you see Because my cutting wasn't perfect, I kind of center my notches. So there's a little bit sticking out here, a little bit here. So then I know it's centered. Okay, my dart in the back is pushed toward the center back. That's the way we pressed it to begin with, but make sure you pin it that way. This one's pressed toward the center in the back also. And there we have it extending as it said. Okay, it's pinned on. So now for number 6, it said to pin it, and then it said stitch. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to sew a 5/8 inch seam. Then we'll come back and I'll show you what layer the seam means. Okay, I've got my zipper open. I'm going to put the edge of my fabric on the 5/8 inch line. You know what? You might see it better. There's a lot here to see. So if I put my tape right at 5/8, you can see what I'm lining up. There we go. Now, so that I don't accidentally catch part of my skirt in my seam here, I've got my fingers, I'm kind of feeling underneath as I go. Actually, it's my thumb behind here. And then I'm straightening things as I go. My facing is now attached to the skirt. Then it said layer seam. Layer means that you're trimming. They could just say trim the seam, and you'd be trimming 1/4 of an inch from the stitching. But they want it to be, it used to use the word grade, okay? So layer may be an easier word to understand. But it means that these seams, one's going to be shorter than the other, so that when this folds over, it's so minuscule, but it's kind of like if you cut them the same and you felt it, you'd feel a drop off. But if you layer it and you cut the one on top a little shorter than the one on the bottom, it's more like a gentle grade. And so that's what it's all about, is making it a smooth grade instead of a drop off. And again, it's so minuscule, but still, that's what they want you to do. So I'm going to cut the top one. See, I'm being careful not to catch the bottom. Now I'm going to show you if you can see from the back. I've got my hand here. It's feeling the seam. I can feel that I've just got one layer. Now, I also tell you that usually with this light weight of fabric, I just trim. I don't grade or layer. I layer when it's like I cut out a black skirt earlier that was with a polyester twill. It was a little heavier, so that would be appropriate. Or corduroy. So something this fine, medium weight, really doesn't need grading, but I'm showing you what to do. Now I'm going to show you on the next one. You would just leave a little bit more seam allowance there. So it's about 1/8 of an inch difference. I cut this one about 1/4 of an inch, and I cut that bottom one about 3/8 of an inch. So that's what layer means. Now, as I told you, now you know what it is. do it on heavier weight fabric, but on this fabric, it's so lightweight, if we just trim, like you're not really going to have this massive drop off, as I said. I think of driving in a mountain, and so there'll be a sign that says grade, and it tells you how steep it is. So when you've got thick layers, you need to grade it because that way you go downhill more gradually, if that makes sense. So anyway, now that I showed you what it means to layer or grade, I'm just going to go ahead and trim this because my fabric is so lightweight. So in other words, I'm going to cut them both the same width. It's a little tricky to go back and cut them. And now it'll be easier. And also, it would be easier if I do this. You know, I like it when the scissors are closer to the table. If I'm trimming with this down on the table, so at least my left arm is steady, resting on the table. Okay, so we trimmed the seam. I showed you how to layer it if you have heavier weight fabric. Now, the next thing it should say is clip. We should be clipping this curve. It's a gradual curve, but when you clip to but not through the stitching, meaning you just use the point of your scissors. So watch, I've got my hand here making sure I'm not catching any of this part of my skirt. I'm just going to clip to the stitching with the point like that. So there's just a little snip there, okay? And if the curve is very severe, a major curve, then you would do the clips closer together. But this is just a pretty mild curve. So we're going to clip about 1 inch apart. And I could feel there's something extra, so there's the dart. I'm okay. So you do not go like this. If you have too much pressure, you'll cut right into your skirt. You just use the point. I'll tell you a story. When I was in summer school in junior high, this was in the early 70s, the girl who sewed next to me, she cut right through her neck facing. It was like, oh no, and she showed me, said, what do I do? So what we did was we went back and made her neck opening a little bit wider. So we had to go re-sew the whole neck to catch the part she cut, so that we could mend it. The hole wasn't there anymore, but she just had a wider neck opening. Come to think of it, it was the late 60s. I'm aging myself. Okay, so now it said layer. It says understitch. Well, one step between that, we're going to press. We're going to press our little seam toward our facing. And then number 7, understitch. Right here on this picture, it shows a row of stitching that's just above our seam. It's on the facing section, and it will hold that seam allowance toward the facing so that here, when we fold it down, it stays in place. So I'm going to go to the iron. My seam is flat. I'm turning my facing up, and I'm going to press right along the seam. Now notice, see, this is curved, this is curved. So as before, I'm not pressing my facing flat. What I'm making sure I press is this little seam toward the facing. So I'm using the point of my iron, the tip. And with my left hand, I'm making sure that the seam is toward the facing. All right, meet you back at the sewing machine. So I'm ready to understitch. I'm stitching my facing, or I should say my seam, my little skinny seam allowance to my facing. I can feel and check it, make sure that the seam allowance is toward my right hand. We finished step 7. Well, let's take a look at step 8. The picture looks like this. Here's the wrong side of your skirt. The facing is turned toward the wrong side, so you see the right side up. And let's look at the directions. Step 8, turn facing to inside, turning under, and slip stitching side edges. Press. To keep the facing from rolling to outside, secure it at the seam allowances by tacking it by hand, stitching in the ditch, or using a small piece of fusible web. So they're giving you some choices as to how to attach the side seams. I usually use a couple of hand stitches, but it is interesting they're saying stitch in the ditch, so I'll show you how to do that, or some fusible web, and I don't recommend that. I think that if you put this in the dryer over time, it's going to come loose and you're going to have sticky stuff in your dryer or on other clothes. Okay, it also says sew hook and eye above zipper when garment is finished. And it shows you a picture of that. You may or may not need a hook and eye. And so when we look at mine, we'll see whether or not I needed one. So let's go ahead. I'm going to turn my skirt inside out. And then I'll begin pinning it like this so I can press it and do the handwork. I have my skirt laying on the table in the same direction that my little diagram is. My facing is right side up, my skirt is right side down, and I've pinned the side seam right here. So when it says now, secure it at the seam allowances by tacking it by hand, stitching in the ditch, or using a small piece of fusible web. I've already said I don't recommend the web, but I told you I'd show you stitch in the ditch. Well, what that means is you're stitching right here where the seam is, the facing and the skirt together. So here's my side seam, and we usually do that from the right side because you want to see exactly where the seam is. I'll go ahead and take my pin out. But to stitch in the ditch means in the seam. And now, because I'm using black thread, I'm not going to keep it there, but I just want to show you how to do it. So stitch in the ditch, what you're doing is you're stitching right in the seam. And I can feel the end of the facing is right there. I'll backstitch here. But when your thread is matching your garment, that row of stitching isn't going to show at all. So that's a way that this is tacked down, called stitch in the ditch. Now, what I prefer to do, because I think it just looks a little more professional, is to do a few of the hand stitches using a needle and thread. So let me show you that. I've pinned this all the way around. To tack it by hand, I have my needle threaded. It's got a knot, it's doubled. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of thread from my seam allowance. Excuse me, yeah, a few stitches or threads there. Go through the fold of my facing. And then I'll do it again. So 2 stitches had 4 threads. I'm going to go over to the other side, on the other side of the side seam, and do it again. So the point is, I'll show you, you're not, whoops, that's good, I looked. I went through too many layers. You're not going to have this show on the right side, so you're picking up just the seam allowance. And so here now we do not see the needle. Originally I saw the shiny part, so I knew that I went too deep. I went through all the layers. But you're just picking up a little of this seam allowance and then a little of this fold of the facing. And that's what you're stitching together. So I've gone twice. So now I'm going to tie a knot. I'm going to just do one more. Tie a knot here. Put it in place. And you know what? I like to hide the tails. So if I go through, I'm not really making a secure stitch. I'm just putting the tails of that through that fabric, the fold of the fabric. Now when I do this, now there's no end of the thread. It disappeared. Okay, I'll also do that in places like where the darts are. It doesn't mention that, but the purpose of this is to keep it from flipping up when you're changing, when you're, you don't want to have to remember to get your facing tucked in. So if it's already tacked down, it just makes it easier. So here, make sure there's a knot at the end. But I'll just do a couple stitches. At the darts. So again, I'm not going all the way through. I'm just stitching that little fold of the dart to the facing. And now I'll tie a knot. And I'll hide it. Okay, I do the same here. And then, see how where the zipper is? I tucked under the edge. I folded it. And so I'm going to tack this down. Only this time, I usually do single thread. I don't want my thread to get caught, tangled in the teeth of the zipper. So that happens less often if you've just got one single thread. All right, so there's my knot. To tack my facing down along the zipper edge, I'll take a little bit of the stitches on the zipper tape, then go through the fold of the facing. I've got single thread now, but there's a knot there. Make a couple of stitches. There's 2, there's 3. And then you can see this is open right here. That's really okay, but I'm going to just go up the side by just a few stitches. So I'm just taking part of my zipper tape. I'm not going all the way through, just like on the skirt. And my stitches are actually hidden. Okay, I went a little more than halfway up. I'm going to tie a knot. I'm going to use a quilting technique. I just tied one small knot, and in quilting we hide our knots. So I'm going through the fold, hook my needle out, and just a little jerk will make that knot go inside. All right, so that facing is sewn down. I'll do the same thing here, and I'll just sew up from the bottom to here where it starts to cross. Now what I want you to see is, because I followed the directions about how you put the zipper in, we put the tape, the top of the zipper right at the edge of the fabric. So our zipper ends right here. So there's no need for a hook and eye. If you place your zipper a little below the seam allowance when you're putting your zipper in to begin with, then you will need a hook. But I kind of figured from these directions we weren't going to need one. And so that's what it looks like when you're done. Here's the outside. You lay that flat. So we've got our facing tucked in, and it's all even at the top. And you see that one pin because this isn't stitched yet. So I need to finish my hand stitching here. And looks like I'm going to tack down that one more dart. And then this whole portion of my skirt is finished. All that we have left for our next episode is to do the hem. I'll see you then.